Hey friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. We're out here by my potato patch today, and we are going to be harvesting some potatoes. Now in this bed here, I have a mix of red potatoes and gold potatoes that have been growing all season. As you can see, the plants are pretty much died back now, and that is a sign that these potatoes are ready to harvest. So for the largest harvest of potatoes, you want to wait until all the foliage has died back. If you want to harvest some a little bit earlier for what's called new potatoes, which are really, really delicious, then you can go ahead and harvest some a couple weeks earlier. We did harvest a few a couple weeks earlier and they were really good, but we have saved the bulk of our potato crop for now that the foliage has died back. That's how we know that we are going to get the maximum yield possible, and that will also ensure that these potatoes have the longest storage potential as well. So I have not grown potatoes very many times in the past, and pretty much every time I've grown them, I've had some sort of issue. They've either been eaten by pests or something's gone wrong. So I'm not really sure what to expect with this potato harvest, but we are going to find out together. So one other interesting variable about this season's potato crop is that I did not plant seed potatoes. I used leftover potatoes that were from a bulk order of potatoes I purchased for the purpose of eating, and the extra ones that started to sprout ended up getting planted in here. So I don't really know what varieties these are, aside from the fact that I have a red variety and a gold variety. But we're going to go ahead, we're going to dig up this bed, we're going to see how the potatoes look, and hopefully we'll be pleasantly surprised with a good harvest. So on this end of the bed here, I have grown red potatoes. I think about 2/3 to 3/4 of this bed is planted out in red potatoes, and the other 1/3 to 1/4 of the bed is gold potatoes. So obviously we're most likely to have mostly red potatoes. Now I do want to mention there is a chance of a severe thunderstorm coming. So I'm hoping to get all of this done before that happens. When you're harvesting potatoes, it's best to harvest them before a large rain rather than after a large rain for the best storage life possible. So I want to go ahead and get these harvested if I can before the storm runs in. If I'm not able to finish, I'll meet you back here after the storm passes when we harvest the rest of them, and I'll show you how the harvest went. So let's go ahead and dig in and see what we've got waiting for us. So harvesting potatoes is always kind of fun. Anything that grows underground and you have no idea what you're getting, it could be a complete surprise. So this could be a complete bust. We could end up with not very much at all, or we could end up with a lot. So judging by what I found here, it looks like the number of potatoes from this plant is pretty good, but they are on the small side. So we're going to keep digging and see what we get. So just digging through here with my hands may not be the most efficient method of harvesting, but I think that this is the least likely to damage any of the potatoes that we have. So I'm just going to go ahead and do it this way, and hopefully we get a good harvest. And with this being a raised bed like this, the soil's loose enough that I can pretty easily dig through it with my hands and just find all the potatoes that we have hiding under the soil. Now you can see that some of the potatoes came out incredibly small. I don't really seem to have any really large sized potatoes. These will be a good size for roasting, but I'm going to keep digging and hopefully we'll get a few larger ones as well. So I'm about halfway through the potato bed so far, and so far I got about this many, which is not an amazing harvest. But I think considering what the growing conditions we had over here, I think this is pretty decent. Now this was not in full sun. This bed here, potatoes really do prefer full sun, and I probably would have gotten quite a bit more impressive of a yield if this wasn't full sun, but this was definitely partial sun at best. So these potatoes, I'm guessing that is probably the reason why they're a little bit smaller. Most likely if this was full sun, I probably would have gotten the same number of potatoes, but they would have been slightly larger. Now, I did come across a couple potatoes like this, where you can see it's either rotting or partly eaten, something like that. And there isn't really all that much I could have done about that. Now, this year I'm growing my potatoes in this raised bed. This is an 8-foot by 4-foot raised bed. Down in the bottom of the bed here, you can see that it's lined with hardware cloth. This is to prevent creatures like voles from climbing into my potato bed. So the one year in the past that I had grown a significant number of potatoes in the ground, I did not have a bed that was lined with hardware cloth, and what happened was the majority of my potatoes were partly eaten by voles. So I harvested a lot of potatoes that looked just like that. They had bites out of them and they really didn't look that great. So this year, I think lining the bed with hardware cloth was really the way to go because the majority of the potatoes came out looking great. So I still do have half the bed left to harvest, so I'm going to go ahead and get that harvested. I'll meet you back here when I'm done and I'll show you what we got. Now you'll notice that I do have a couple companion plants mixed in. I tried growing some bush beans with these. That was a little bit of an experiment and they were not all that successful. Basically what happened was the potatoes grew so tall so fast that they blocked all the light from getting to those beans. So I'm attempting to leave the beans in the bed to grow a little bit. They may do a little bit better now that the potatoes are gone. But honestly, I think that really that was just more of a learning experience than an actual successful harvest. So I'm just going to keep harvesting my potatoes, try to disturb the beans as little as possible and see if I can keep them going. And I'll come back and show you what we got. So it should be about done with the red potatoes. You can see I switched them to this larger pot here. So that's a pretty decent yield. Not amazing, as I said, but I'm happy with it. So this should last pretty well. I'm going to try to store a few of these smaller ones and see if I can get them to store all winter and use them as seed potatoes again in the spring. So we may give that a try. I might possibly experiment with trying to grow a couple of these in pots in the house over the winter. We'll see how that goes. I'm not really sure how successful that will be, but I may give it a try. So the last little bit of bed that I have to harvest here is gold potatoes. I did find a couple gold potatoes already kind of on the edge of where I was digging for my red potatoes. Now, if you remember back in the spring when we planted those potatoes together, I can link that video down in the video description in case you missed it. My gold potatoes were really sprouted. They're kind of sprouted out of control, and some of them already had tiny little potatoes growing on the roots. So I really don't know what to expect in the harvest from these gold potatoes. I had a little more hope with the red potatoes, which seem to have done okay. So as I said, I found a couple of these already at the edge of the red potatoes. So we're going to dig up the gold potatoes and see how well they did. I don't have quite as high hopes for those. As you can see, their foliage is not quite as dyed back as the red potatoes were too, which might have a little bit of a negative impact on yield, but I think it'll be okay. So we're going to go ahead and dig in and see what we have for gold potatoes. So this one looks like it was actually a decent sized one, but it's half eaten or rotten. I don't really know. So I'm just going to throw that into the woods. That's unfortunate. Now, as you can see along the edge of the bed here, I do have some other plants growing. I have some squashes that at some point will hopefully be climbing this trellis here. So as I'm harvesting the potatoes, I'm going to be making a point not to disturb those squash leaves, which means that most likely I will end up missing a few of the potatoes along the edge. I can come back out in the fall later when the squash is done and harvest those potatoes at that point. But for now, they're going to stay in the ground a little bit longer. Hopefully, they'll do okay with that. So I am finding, for whatever reason, the gold potatoes seem to be a lot more susceptible to rot than the red ones. So that alone is going to reduce the yield pretty significantly. I don't know if it's the variety. I'm not really sure the reason. But unfortunately, there's a handful of potatoes that are rotten. So here is the final harvest of the gold potatoes. It is quite a bit less than the red, which makes sense because I did plant only about 1/3 the number of plants as I planted the red potatoes. So that alone would make for a smaller harvest. We did also lose more of the gold potatoes to rot than we did the red potatoes. So that's another difference also. And there's probably most likely also a couple more potatoes along the edge of the bed that I wasn't able to reach because I did not want to disturb the roots of the squash. But I am going to say that this was still a success, at least a modest success. Because the potatoes that I planted here, again, if you refer to that video, they were sprouted to the point of being really shriveled and basically inedible. And I definitely harvested more than I planted, and what I harvested is in much better condition than what I planted. So this is a success. I wouldn't say that it is the ideal potato harvest, but I'm still happy with it. So I would definitely encourage you to give things a try, experiment in the garden. And even though those gold potatoes that I planted looked like they were not going to amount to anything, I mean, I ended up with this. This is gonna make a nice few meals for us. And they're homegrown and fresh, they'll taste delicious, and we'll really enjoy them. And I almost forgot to say, now that this potato bed is cleared out and pretty much empty, it is time to amend this and get something planted for either a second summer harvest or a late fall harvest here. So over the next few days, I'll be adding a few inches of compost to this bed, and I will be figuring out what to plant here. So if you have any suggestions about what you would put in this bed, go ahead and leave those in the comments, because I would love to get some ideas. I have a few ideas I'm considering, but I'm not decided yet. So I'd love to hear from you guys. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today and harvesting potatoes with me. I definitely hear the thunder in the distance. I'm not sure if you can hear that on the camera or not, but it's off in the distance. So I'm gonna go ahead and get packed up and get inside and get these potatoes inside before it starts to rain. So I hope you're having a great day, and I can't wait to see you soon. I'll see you next time.